that's not what he said. Listen, I want to tell all of you people listening that Bob Grant truly loves you. Why else would I be here? I mean, he goes away for a vacation, and what does he give you? The very best available. Modest, humble Alan Burke. I will be with you for this week. I will be delighted to talk to you, assuming you have something to say. I would like to mention that at 3 o'clock today, we are going to talk to Marilyn Milos, who is head of the National Organization of Circumcision Information Resource Center. She doesn't think that kids ought to be circumcised. Also, Dr. Aaron Fink, medical doctor, author of a book called Circumcision, A Parent's Decision for Life. That's at 3 o'clock. Then at 4, Roy Innes, chairman of the Congress of Racial Equality, will be discussing a lot of things. He's a fellow I've known for many, many years. Roy's going to be in the studio and so on. And these are the types of things we have planned, which means that whatever it is you want, you shall have on the program. The telephone numbers from New Jersey, you can call us, dial or punch, depending on how your phone operates. 201 489 WABC is from New Jersey. From everywhere else, you can simply call us here in New York, 212-877-WABC. Wouldn't you know that the minute I arrived this morning, there was a letter awaiting me. The envelope was dated August 25th, so obviously the individual knew I was going to come in. I won't mention the person's name. It wouldn't be fair to any of us. The letter comes from Bronxville, New York, and it says, "Dear Mr. Burke, I remember you 20 years ago, and you still have the same idiotic ideas. I know that you detest Richard Nixon. I teach American history in college, and in my class I mentioned Helen Gahagan Douglas. Truman said she was not fit to be in Congress. I tell my students that she wasn't fit to be in a, well, I can't say it. A bordello would be a upgraded synonym for what this crude person wrote. But what the person wrote is of no consequence. First of all, I don't detest Richard Nixon. The thing in this letter that I find interesting is that he says, I teach American history in college. Now, if a person who teaches American history in college tells his students things that he has written, he is certainly not doing a creditable job. As a matter of fact, he should probably be ousted for lying. So he did at least have the courage to sign his name. We tracked him down, and we found out that indeed he is not a teacher in college. He is a librarian, or at least claims to be, at some minor school. I'm sure he's listening to the program, and at this point is totally apoplectic, which is probably an improvement on his usual state. I thought we ought to make that comment about the educational system, but more than that, we are really commenting upon don't believe everything you read, don't believe any of what you hear, find out for yourself. All right? Now, James, our first call is line 1. Line 7. All right, I'll put one back on hold, and we'll take line 7. Hello? Nobody's there. Hello there.
Yep.
Yes, sir. You're John?
I'm John from Brooklyn.
Well, good. I'm glad you got rid of him, and I don't know why he would wait to make such a statement. All right? All right, line 3, you're there.
Alan Burke? Alan Burke?
Well, who else?
Oh, my God. I want to welcome you back. I feel like I'm welcoming you back from the dead. Someone told me that you had died, and I nearly dropped dead. I was so in pain, and I'm so thrilled to be back. I'm serious. Do you remember me, Alan?
I love it.
Do you remember me?
How could I ever forget you?
You do. Remember I wrote that song for you?
Oh.
And the whole place was singing it with me. I can't give you anything but love. Alan, remember?
How how could I forget it? Harry James accompanied you on the trumpet.
Right.
Sure. Well, listen, I appreciate hearing this, and believe me, I am not dead.
I want you to be back and to stay. Are you going to stay in New York?
No, I'm going back to Florida.
Oh, come on, Alan.
No, we'll discuss it some other time. Listen,
Okay,
it's nice to hear
bye.
from you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bill, let's talk about the educational system. Bill?
Yeah.
Well?
During the 40s and the 50s, we had that liberal education that the pro-communists and the pro-liberals were indoctrinating all these people at colleges and high school.
Well, you want to... Wait a minute. Bill, explain... No, you wait. Explain it to me when you use these general... Will you shut up and wait a minute? We can have a conversation, but you're not going to monopolize the program. Okay? Do you want to have a conversation?
But I'm just saying...
Hey.
I went through it with the liberals.
Hey, stupid, shut up. You want to shut up a minute? I'm going to make a sentence, and then it's going to be your turn. If you want to have a conversation like that, we can do it. If you don't want that, why don't you hang up? Now, what's your choice?
Go on, make your statement.
No, you won't. It's my turn. Now, do you want to play the game this way or not?
Well,
now these big decisions... How long have you had this brain tumor? Get rid of him. I don't need to talk to an idiot like that. Hello there.
Mr. Burke.
Yes, dear.
How do you do and welcome back?
Thank you so much.
I wanted to say this, and mine will be very sensible. I trust that you will think so. Why, in the name of heaven, would you want such a subject as circumcision? Who's interested? I mean, we will have to tune you out. Why?
Wait a minute. Wait, excuse me just a moment, dear. You sound like such a charming lady.
Yes.
When you say who's interested in circumcision, first of all, the baby is.
He is, right?
Wouldn't you agree that...
He is what?
Of course he does.
It doesn't hurt him at all.
Have you ever been circumcised?
Yes.
Now, that on the surface sounds like an absurd question.
No, I've had children little boys who have been, and you'd be really crying. I mean, they were just wonderful. And that's the way it's supposed to be. It's for health's sake, and I don't want a whole discussion of that. Because if you want us to listen to that, why in heaven's name did you choose that on your day back?
Isn't it amazing the things I really have to contend with?
There was nothing more disgusting than having a urologist on the radio. It gets so. I heard a discussion about that on the television one day. And you had to turn it off because we all got sick to our stomachs. You know what urologists talk about, don't you?
Oh, no. What do they talk about?
Everything to do with your organs. With yours.
Why do you find the subject either... You're embarrassing. You're laughing with that embarrassed laugh. What is there about... Will you listen a minute?
I'm really not.
You're not listening?
I'm not embarrassed.
You're not embarrassed?
No.
Well, can you be quiet a moment and let me get a word in edgewise?
Of course.
Thank you. What is there about the scientific discussion of the treatment of the genitalia that seems to upset you?
Who needs it? We need it.
Did it ever occur to you that there may be millions of people listening who have an avid interest in this subject? Just because you don't doesn't mean there are others who do not. Why are you now...
No, but if we need a doctor, we go to one, don't we?
I didn't say that you had to wait until you needed a doctor. Isn't it possible that the subject would just be of general interest? Isn't it possible that for thousands of years people have been making a terrible mistake? Just because something was told to you as a child, does this mean that this is the law forever and ever?
No, but wouldn't one go to their rabbi or priest first? And not take advice from people on the radio about such an important question?
How do you know? You haven't heard the subject. What are you assuming? That's an interesting question. Good, I think I'll ask it. What are you assuming that the subject is going to be about?
Circumcision.
Well, that's simply the name of the subject. What are we going to discuss?
Wait, you'll hear what depths he will go into. That it is absurd. It really gets to be sickening. I heard it once on television. I don't intend to listen again. And I think a lot of people will tune you out.
No, I don't think anybody's going to tune me. I don't think, madam, cool it. I don't think anyone is going to tune me out for a variety of reasons. One, it is very seldom that you have the opportunity to sit at the feet of the guru and understand what is really happening with life. I'm trying to teach you something, and if you're bright, you will listen and learn.
I know.
The rest, I'm not through yet.
Okay.
The rest of the people will listen out of a kind of sexual curiosity. It is a vicarious sort of thing. You would be amazed. Now, let me, and I shouldn't do this at this point, we should let the person who is really the proponent of the subject do this, but I will tell you this much. There is no implication in this discussion concerning religion. She believes, as do all those who support her, that if circumcision is part of the religious culture in which you live, that is fine. She has other reasons. So that you're suggesting that, well, if one has to be curious about this, let them talk to their rabbi or priest. Religion isn't a part of this at all.
Yeah, but may I say something?
Of course.
The fact is that before they make the decision, most people will probably speak to their rabbi.
Why? Why? Because what?
Because they believe...
Why, does their rabbi, is he an authority on circumcision?
Of course, they are believers in God, and they will...
Well, madam, the world...
Everything that they do...
You will... Look, I realize this is going to become as a terrible shock to you, but everybody in the world is not an Orthodox, Reform, or conservative Jew.
Of course not.
Then why would they want to speak to the rabbi?
Christian people, I'm saying Christian people will speak to their priest.
Why? What makes you think that a Catholic goes to the priest and say, hey, listen, I just had a little boy. Shall I have it chopped off or not?
No, but I think they would. I think they would.
You know what your problem is. You're speaking with total emotional involvement and very little information.
Not.
Are you Catholic?
That's beside the point.
No, it is not beside the point.
A better question. Are you...
Madam, listen, you have no idea how interesting you are.
Mr. Burke,
and if you will just stay where you are, and I'll put you on hold, and I'll get back to you after this announcement. I miss her. I was coming back to discuss her problems. But instead, we'll, let's see, who shall we talk to? Talk to, Richard. Hello, Richard.
Oh, Alan.
Yeah, Richard.
How are you?
Fine, thanks.
I was going to ask you a couple of questions. I read an article a couple of weeks ago in a Sunday Times magazine about LBJ. This writer, forgotten his name, said he was a bit paranoid. Is that true? How much of that is true?
From my knowledge, he was a manic depressive. But then most of us are, to some degree or another. When we hang these titles upon people, particularly those in public office, we may be doing them and the country a disservice, because to some degree we are all, I suppose, manic depressive. To some degree we are certainly all neurotic. To some degree we are all, we have mental aberrations. In the case of those who have it to a major degree, then we are either kept at home, institutionalized, hospitalized, or whatever. But, yes, he was a manic depressive, which simply means that he has highs and lows. The mood swing is just like a vocalist who can sing in the lower ranges and the extremely high ranges and goes from one to the other very rapidly. So that's the LBJ story, so to speak.
I want to make one other comment on this. Well, two things. Dan Quayle, I regard that as a non-issue now. I think the press is going to have a backlash against the press on that issue.
Well, how can the press have a backlash? Your use of that word is interesting.
I mean, a backlash against the press is what I mean.
Well, against the press?
Yeah.
How? I mean, what?
Well, I think you have to look at it in the text of the times that it was. People were making choices back then, and they made them one way or the other, and I think he made his. And the fact that some guys, very few of the percentage that went into the military went to Vietnam, and very few of those ended up fighting.
I don't think that there is... Excuse me. I don't believe that is really a great deal of emphasis placed upon the fact that he did not want to go to Vietnam. I don't think that he is different from any other person who didn't go in that sense.
That's correct.
I don't think that he's different, or his parents are different from any other parent who said, let's see what we can do to keep you out. Within the confines of legality.
Correct.
I think the fact about Quayle as it exists now hinges upon several things. One, he's a rich kid who was literally born with a silver spoon in his mouth. I've got to tell you, I can't tell you how many kids I know like this who are no longer kids. I've known many of them. In my youth, I knew a lot of rich guys who went to college to learn how to play golf. And that's Quayle's claim to fame. If Quayle were a kid from the other side of the tracks who had made it to this stage, nobody would pick on him. I personally don't like him. I want to go on record right now. I don't like Quayle. And the reason I don't like Quayle is because I don't think that I want a guy who escaped fighting in a war, regardless of whether the war was right or wrong. I don't want to get into that at this time. But I think it is wrong for him to be in the position to send other people to war. And you know the old phrase, a heartbeat away from the presidency.
Well.
And I don't think that he's qualified to make that decision. Bush fought in the war, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Okay. Quayle is just a rich kid, and he's a snobby kid. And if you were around a long time ago, and I have no idea how old you are, but there are certain cities in this country...
I'm of the Vietnam era.
Okay, then you know for a fact there are several cities in this country, a number of them, that represent a kind of a lifestyle, a kind of a society that you will find the Quayles of the world living in and raised in. A short time ago, Scarsdale was one of those towns. You know that. It's changed a great deal, as all towns do. Short Hills was another one of those towns. Palm Beach in Boca Raton, Florida was another one of those kinds of towns. Palm Springs, they have these places all over the country, and these are the places where the majority of the population is, one, WASP, two, country clubs, and before the federal laws, these were restricted country clubs. There's a country club, I believe, in Scarsdale, which until, and I don't know what it's like today, and I have no idea what it was like then, because I certainly didn't avail myself of it. I think it's called Wingfoot, one of the prime, beautiful clubs of this nation, which was a restricted club. The Scarsdale Country Club was restricted at one time. Charlie Wilson, who was, I believe, head of General Electric, was one of the founding members. Now, he's dead, and a lot of the old guard are dead, and they eventually, because business got bad, they had to take in a few of the token Jews, and ultimately, a Jew became the president of the Scarsdale Country Club. And then I believe he was killed in a plane crash or something of that sort. But the point is, there are Quayles that populate these kinds of towns. And people like that should not be in the position of telling the great masses of this country that they've got to go put themselves in the position of getting killed when they did everything in the world to take themselves out of the position of getting killed, and they had the wherewithal with which to do that, where the average person does not have that kind of situation.
Yeah, well, the press seemed to me like it was implying that anybody who didn't fight in Vietnam was a draft dodger. If you were in the Air Force or the Navy or the Coast Guard or whatever,
Well, I'm not...
To me, that the press was implying, well, if you didn't fight in Vietnam...
No, I don't think anybody's mad at Quayle for having stayed out of the war by joining the National Guard. I think people don't accept Quayle because he's a rich kid who is not too bright, who has a terrific handicap when it comes to playing golf, and all of the usual clout that goes with people in that socioeconomic position, and they're not my kind of folk. Thank you for calling.
Thanks.
John? Are you there, John?
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about this subject that you raised about the situation with education in America.
Yes.
Because I think that what's going on in the election campaign illustrates just how screwed up it is. For instance, there's major problems with education in America, as that American history professor gave a good example in his own testimony. But the debate now in the presidential election from two candidates who both claim to be, quote, education-oriented is, one, whether teachers should be required to give or hold the Pledge of Allegiance. That seems to be the major problem with American education. And
let me ask you a question.
Yes.
What has the Pledge of Allegiance got to do with education?
Well, that's precisely my point. Here's two people who are supposedly interested in education, and the only major debate in their campaign about proving education is whether they're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance or not. In other words, or on Dukakis's side, he's for a drug czar that'll somehow make drug-free schools, and being a teacher myself.
Well, actually, if you'll permit this, yes. I don't believe you're talking about the educational system at all. You're talking about campaign promises and other forms of lies that are always thrown about at the time that one candidate establishes himself to be a candidate.
Yes.
You're not talking about the educational system. If you want to talk about the educational system, talk about the illiteracy that we suffer. Talk about where we place in the civilized and uncivilized world when it comes to the education, the quality of education. Talk about the fact that if you complete high school at almost any European high school, that is the equivalent of a 2-year American college education. Talk about that. That will tell you what a lousy educational system we have. Talk about the strength of the unions in education that causes people to keep their jobs when they ought to be committed in some cases, who don't know how to handle students on either a social or educational level, who put up with all of the trash from the students. Talk about the fact that they have not kept up with the studies that they have to have and learn before they can teach a subject. That's education. Pledge of Allegiance has nothing to do with the educational system.
Well, I agree with you, but the point I'm making is that when you try to have a debate in this country about the educational system, it degenerates to exactly the kinds of things we're seeing in this campaign, not the questions that you're raising. And I'm just wondering how you get out of, in a country like the United States, how you get out of that kind of degenerating discussion when, in fact, from the top, this is the kind of stuff you get.
Really, there's only one way to do it. You scream a lot, and you make them pay attention to what you're saying, and you don't tell them in any way, by action or deed or word, that you have any respect for them because they have a title. There is no need for you to say sir to your senator or sir or ma'am to your congressman or congresswoman if indeed what they are doing is disreputable and stupid, any more than it is essential that you should show respect to a person because their hair is white or gray, just because somewhere in your background or your heritage you have said you have to respect your elders. You don't have to respect your elders. Elders have to earn respect just as everyone does. Age does not bring wisdom. It only brings age. And that's all it ever has brought. It brings old, creaky bones and pains and ailments and Medicare. That's all age brings. And the idea that old people are bright is in itself the height of stupidity. It takes a lot of experience if you have managed to take advantage of the things that have occurred in your life and you put them into your little computer and your computer is ready to evaluate and you take the best out of it. But you can't just grow old and be bright. God is not stupid. He didn't plan it that way. Have I made my point?
Yeah.
That's because I'm educated.
All right.
Thank you, John.
Very good.
And we are just blessed here today. What you're saying, John. And I have no comment.
What I want to discuss is the presidential campaign.
All right, you go ahead, but we have only 1 minute.
Okay, I'll have to say it fast. So what I want to say is I truly resent, being a Dukakis supporter and a Democrat, I truly resent the Republicans turning this thing into a question of patriotism. Somehow the Republicans feel that they're going to picture the Democrats as somehow loving this country less or being less patriotic with this whole bogus issue of the Pledge of Allegiance. And it's insulting. It's insulting to the intelligence of the American voter, but unfortunately I think it works. And it's an orchestrated thing. You had that senator who said he had some indication that Dukakis's wife burned the American flag at one point in her career, and this whole thing with the Pledge of Allegiance. And even in his defense of Quayle, he goes on to say, well, he didn't burn his draft card, he didn't go to Canada and by gosh, he didn't burn the American flag, linking Dukakis's wife with that statement. And I think it's just a low, slimy campaign that they're doing. Hopefully it will backfire, but I'm not as confident as I should be on that. And they all said they wanted to talk about the issues. And if this is the issue that the Republicans want to talk about, I think they got a losing cause.
Well, I think that you're being much too tolerant if you think for a moment that it's going to backfire. The only way for the Democrats to fight the slime is to come up with slime of their own, and that's a terrible thing to do, but it's the way to have an opportunity to win. Thank you so much for calling. Now, in the next hour, we're going to be talking to Marilyn Milos of the National Organization of Circumcision Information, and we will do that after the news on WABC New York. Next hour, people, as you know, I live in Florida. People in Florida wonder why everybody in the north assumes that when we have a tropical depression that we're having a hurricane. Do you know that I have gone from Florida to New York, from Florida to other parts of the country, picked up a local newspaper in the city, and have been totally amazed at the description of the weather that I left only 3, 4, 5 hours ago.
Really?
Totally erroneous. Totally erroneous. And I think it's done to make people buy papers.
Well, possibly. Maybe it's just ignorant.
I want you to hang around and listen to this program, Harley, because the next subject may be of some use to you. I don't know, but let's find out.
The subject of what?
Circumcision. Hello there. My name is Alan Burke, and I'm here in New York substituting for dear friend Bob Grant.
And before I became a nurse, I was a mother. I was a mother of 4 children. 3 of them were boys. And I was told when my sons were infants that circumcision was a necessary procedure, that it only took a moment, that it didn't hurt, that it would keep my sons from having terrible infections later or perhaps an adult circumcision. And I allowed this procedure to be done. When I went to nursing school then in 1979, I saw circumcision for the first time. So to see a baby boy strapped to a plastic board and have part of his genitals, part of his penis cut off, to scream in a way I'd never heard a human being scream before, and to hear the doctor say there was no medical reason for doing this was shocking to me. I began to I wondered what my own sons had endured and why. I began to do research to find out we're the last country in the world to do an unnecessary surgical procedure on our babies. 85% of the world's male population has never been circumcised. Most of the countries in the world do not practice circumcision, and even those countries that adopted it to prevent masturbation, the English-speaking countries is why it was adopted here in America, most of those countries have stopped doing it also. They've learned that the foreskin has a reason for being there. It's normal, healthy, functioning tissue, and most of the world doesn't do it. It's only in America where this continues to be a $200 million a year business is the American medical community chasing its tail to find justification for an unwarranted surgical procedure.
Now, Marilyn, you say that the reason it was adopted in this country was to prohibit masturbation?
To prevent masturbation. In the late 1800s, it was begun to prevent masturbation, yes.
Doctor, let me ask you, if one is uncircumcised, does that mean that that individual, that male, cannot masturbate?
Of course you can masturbate.
Well, then I don't understand Marilyn's statement.
I mean, you know, the statements that this was done in that sense, you see, there were a number of probable reasons, but that's, you know, historical, and one doesn't know for sure what the reasons were. Hygiene was undoubtedly a major factor. If I have the opportunity, I can comment now about some of the things that Ms. Milo spoke about.
Go ahead.
I think really, you know, that what was considered to be anecdotal, full of rancor and rhetoric over the last few thousand years, the time has really come that the so-called alleged medical benefits really be clearly expelled out. And this is what we have done in the book that I'm talking about, which I'll mention later. Sexually transmitted diseases are really no longer a matter of morals. They've become a matter of life and death. And the public is entitled to know the facts, not opinions, because what you're hearing here are a lot of opinions. Now, I believe that the foreskin can be dangerous to one's health, and that there exists a great deal of scientific data to support that belief. Let me just mention just a few things just in passing, and then we'll go along. It's been shown already in a number of studies that there's a 10 to 20-fold greater incidence of significant urinary tract infections in infants, male infants obviously, who are uncircumcised. It's been also well documented that you can totally prevent cancer of the penis, which occurs 1 in every 600 uncircumcised men in this country, according to the statistics that they're quoting. And that means that you've only had about 9 historically over the last 100 years or so in the world literature, compared to the 30 or 40,000 we may have had in this country alone. In other countries, it's very rampant, and it's a much more common condition than what you'll ever experience. Thirdly, we can decrease significantly a number of sexually transmitted diseases. For example, genital syphilis, herpes, chancroid, penile ulcers, genital warts, gonorrhea, candida fungal infections, probable group B hemolytic strep, Gardnerella vaginitis is a common occurrence with vaginal infections with women, and recently there's been studies, 2 or 3 already, which have begun to clearly show that the uncircumcised male is predisposed to the acquisition of AIDS. The diabetic, furthermore, is predisposed to having need for circumcision because of phimosis or tight foreskin, and in any event, anywhere from 5 to 10% of males following the period of infancy will require a circumcision later in their adult life, and that has been also documented. So at a time when there's going to be a lot more expense, pain, psychological impact, all the various things that will occur when you're done in later life. I can comment about the so-called, or the problems inherent in pain with the initial operation. Local anesthesia is increasingly being used nowadays to minimize those occurrences.
All right, Marilyn, how about responding to the doctor?
Well, all of that in one shot. Well, let's just talk first. Recently, a medical professor at Stanford University, reviewed this data that Dr. Fink talks about, and how he addressed the issue. He said these articles are largely a compilation of inadequate studies, half-baked assumptions, bizarre rationalizations, and dubious conclusions. And one of the things he said, it's too bad that our training of physicians does not include courses which teach doctors to analyze the medical literature critically and come to logical decisions. And he talks about that as a deficiency in someone who, in what he called the correspondent urologist who presented this information to him. In terms of sexually transmitted, I'll just go down the list. In terms of sexually transmitted diseases, they run rampant in America, where most sexually active men have been circumcised. So on his face, that's absurd. He talks about a 10 to 20-fold increase in urinary tract infection that was done by one study, Dr. Thomas Wiswell's study, in the Army. There's another Dr. Martin Altschul. Now, you won't hear Dr. Fink mention him, but Dr. Martin Altschul is an Oregon pediatrician and statistician who's looked at all the Kaiser hospitals in the Northwest from 1979 to 1985 and concluded that only 0.1% of the intact males had urinary tract infection. What he believes and speculates is that the difference between his study at Kaiser and Wiswell's Army study is possibly a function of the significant difference in foreskin care, whereas Dr. Wiswell suggested that the parents retract the foreskin to wash under. That's not considered an important part, and as a matter of fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends against that.
All right. Will you, excuse me, Marilyn, would you both hang on just a moment while we make $1 and then we shall return? There is a kind of delicacy, as previously expressed before I got the two of you on the phone, from some of the listeners, expressed by a lady who said, we don't want to discuss that. And I say it is important, but let's do away with all of these statistics because numbers mean very little. Tell us this. One, Marilyn, you started the conversation with you observed a baby being circumcised and the baby was screaming in pain.
Yes.
Doctor, is there any inordinate amount of pain for the infant?
Pain is certainly present during a circumcision. No different than it is through the birth canal or injections for diphtheria, tetanus, and so forth. A person can't express it, but subjectively we see it because of their reaction. And because of that, in the last 10, 15 years or something like the last 10 years, doctors have increasingly begun to use local anesthesia, and I've seen that in a number of instances, and it works perfectly fine when you do a standard, surgical procedure.
At what, excuse me, doctor, at what age are you talking about this local anesthesia? Pardon me?
What happens when you have to do circumcisions in later life, at 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, 10, 50, 90 years of age, often for the youngsters, you use general anesthesia. That's what's done in England and Sweden and elsewhere. And you'll use local anesthesia often for the adult male, when he needs a circumcision. But for the newborn, it's been done historically without anesthesia, but increasingly it seems as if it's a useful consideration to consider the use of anesthesia. And the kids sleep through it. I've seen it done now. 85-90% of the kids sleep right through the procedure.
All right, Marilyn.
Yeah, well, we're talking about anesthetizing a part of the baby's body to cut it off. So first of all, there are risks involved in the surgical procedure, hemorrhage, infection, mutilation, and even death. Of course, you remember the two babies lost their penises in Atlanta, Georgia. So we're not talking about a benign operation here. We're talking about a surgical procedure.
Excuse me, Marilyn. How did the two babies lose their penises in Atlanta, Georgia?
The circumcision was done with an electrocautery device, and their penises were in fact fried. One of the boys had turned into a little girl with a sex change operation. That happened also. The same loss of the penis happened in Louisiana. There are about, on record, 8 to 12 cases, something like that. Did
a doctor perform this?
Yes, in both cases. But let's talk about...
Well, wait just a minute,
let me make this point, though. While we're talking about an unnecessary surgical procedure, whether you anesthetize the baby or not, whether the baby sleeps through the procedure or not, you've created an open wound, which is an opening for infection, and that baby urinates and defecates into that wound and hurts for the days that follow. But more important is the fact that that child lives with the consequences of that surgery for the rest of his life. We're talking about removing normal, healthy, functioning tissue. The foreskin is there for a reason. It has a purpose. It has a function as with every part of the body. And
Marilyn, I want to ask
the boy's right to keep that.
Marilyn, I want to ask a question. In the case of the babies in Atlanta, were there malpractice suits instituted?
Yes. One of them, the one boy got $2.75 million for as if that made it okay to have lost his penis.
Now, you say that the foreskin is essential to the body?
It has a purpose for being there.
What is the purpose?
The purpose is to protect the sensitive glands. In infancy, the foreskin is not retractable. And is adherent to the glands. It's attached by a common membrane, just like the fingernail is attached to the nail bed.
It is my understanding, Marilyn, that your major objection is that it is impersonal. I remember in speaking to you about 3 years ago, you said that you did not object to circumcision when it is done for religious reasons, that because you said at that point there's usually a drop of wine on the end of the finger of a father or someone in the family who was having a personal relationship with that infant at the time, but you objected to it based upon the fact that in the hospitals the doctors strapped the kid to a board like a hunk of meat and simply cut it as if he were in a butcher shop.
True, Alan, and that, as horrible as that is, that's still not the point. The point is, we're horrified when we think of female circumcision being performed on little girls in other countries. How could they do that to little girls? And yet we accept this blindly in our country. We've used one erroneous medical reason after another, and we could talk statistics so everyone's blue in the face. But the rest of the world doesn't do this. We're talking about the right of a human being to his own body. You wouldn't allow this to happen to your daughter. You would be arrested if you tried to circumcise
All right,
your dog, and we do this to our babies without...
Tell me this. Why is the clitoral circumcision done in some of the Arab nations?
Well, there are a lot of excuses. There are many myths.
All right, well, give me the myth.
For example, the clitoris is not clean. It grows so long as to dangle. It will be longer than the penis. If it touches the male organ, the male will be impotent. A woman will not be able to have a husband. She will be so desirous sexually. She will not remain pure to her mate. She will not be able to have a husband because she will be promiscuous if she is allowed to have all of her genitalia. And, of course, baby girls die from this, little girls die from this. 90 million women have been circumcised.
A word in here? Can we get a word in here, Alan?
Go right ahead, Doctor.
May I respond?
Oh, absolutely.
Monologue here. We're dealing here with hysteria, fanaticism, like foreskin fundamentalists. There is no female circumcision done in this country. Alan, let me just say a few things.
Now, wait a minute. Excuse me, Doctor. I don't believe she said there was female circumcisions in this country.
Well, the whole subject, because it all creates imagery. And let me just finish. The California Medical Association on March the 8th, 1988, that's pretty large, first or second and the largest in the country. They adopted the following resolution, that the California Medical Association endorses the concept of newborn circumcision as an effective public health measure. Now, it was my resolution, and I didn't hoodwink all of these thousands of doctors who voted in support.
Against the recommendation of their own scientific board.
Lady, for God's sake, give somebody else a chance. We've heard your hysteria and how there's no function or purpose. Let your listeners at least know this. There is a book. It costs $5.95. They should be obtained from every bookseller in the United States. If they don't have it yet, you can send $5.95 plus $1 postage to the Kavanaugh Publishing Company, 2500 Hospital Drive, Mountain View, California, 94040. You'll get the facts and you'll get scientific facts instead of a lot of this hysteria that's being put on out.
Well, Dr. Fink, how do you respond? Dr. Fink, may I ask you something?
Oh, well.
How do you respond?
I can't really respond very much.
That's all right, Doctor. We got a lot of time.
Well, if you do, it's fine, because otherwise we're just hearing a lot of hysterical...
Ask you a question, Dr. Fink?
Doctor, be cool, Doctor. Be calm.
All right, well,
We'll let Marilyn ask you a question.
I wonder how you respond to the allegations by Dr. Robin at the Stanford University.
Well, when Dr. Robin publishes something, I'll respond. In the meantime, all we have
finish my question?
Is commentary.
Doctor, let her finish.
There is such a thing as scientific publication.
Doctor.
So the doctors can review it and respond.
Clear, isn't it?
Doctor!
Yeah, go ahead, Ellen.
Cool it a minute and let Marilyn finish her statement. Go ahead, Marilyn.
I'm wondering, Dr. Fink, how you would respond to Dr. Robin's allegations that the references and material with which you have based your argument are a compilation of inadequate studies, half-baked assumptions, bizarre rationalizations, and dubious conclusions.
Well, you said a mouthful there. He doesn't even know all the references. The man is an internal medicine man.
Sent him all to study
He's never done a circumcision.
Sent them to him and he studied them.
All I'm saying is that the public is entitled to know facts, not opinions.
Well, what I'm asking you is how do you then regard your facts when other doctors are looking at them and calling them?
Well, when I said to you the California Medical Association, over 31,000 doctors in the state of California, they approved this resolution.
I think that was against the recommendation of their own scientific board.
Hold on a minute, because you see what's happening with you two discussing it as you are. You're coming up with all of these figures and 31,000 this, and frankly, I don't really give a damn.
Okay, fine.
Well, hold on now. Let's talk about circumcision, not statistics. If I wanted statistics, I'd send somebody from my research staff to get statistics.
Okay. Well,
let's talk about circumcision. How does an uncircumcised husband and a circumcised husband please the wife? That's a question that pertains to circumcision. Mm-hmm. That is important. Now, let's stop talking. Now, hold on a minute, both of you. Let's stop talking about diseases and who does what, and a little boy is going to, sleep in a wet diaper and get infected. Let's talk about those who have achieved adulthood and have a relationship in a family sense or in a non-family situation, but they do have a relationship. What is the advantage and disadvantage to circumcision?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the advantage is...
I've had two husbands, and one was circumcised, one was not circumcised.
All right.
And it is very different. The function of the foreskin is much... The function of sexuality when a man is intact is much different than the function of in intercourse when a man has been circumcised.
All right, let's bring this down to a level that anybody can relate to. Was the circumcised husband better in bed than the uncircumcised husband?
I think the people who are better in bed are the ones that you most love, and that would be like you're saying to a woman.
Well, let's be totally objective about it, Marilyn. Let's not...
Totally objective. It's very clear for a woman who knows both an intact and a circumcised lover the difference between the two, and the sexuality, the function of the orgasm, the function of the penis and the vagina when they're in their normal state it works properly. When one of the major complaints of women... Marilyn,
answer. Do this for me, Marilyn. You're such a nice lady, and you've had an uncircumcised husband and a circumcised husband. Which did you have first?
The intact man was first.
The uncircumcised husband was your first husband?
No, the uncircumcised husband was the first husband.
I see. Is he still alive?
He's still alive, yes.
You divorced him?
No, he left me.
He left you?
Yes.
Now, then you married a man who is circumcised?
That's right.
Now, which one was best in bed?
The first husband.
The first husband?
Yes.
Was best in bed. Is that because he was circumcised?
Yes.
I mean, uncircumcised?
Not so much best in bed, but best in the actual act of intercourse.
That's what I'm talking
about. Let's talk about it for a second.
Well, hold on. Wait a minute. We're going to run a commercial, and then we'll get back.
Okay.
Go right ahead, Marilyn.
Great. So let's talk about how the penis works when it's working and when it's all there. When a man gets erect, what's happening is the penis actually fills the foreskin. So what was the inner lining of the foreskin now becomes the outside part of the shaft. The glands...
Marilyn, without getting as technical, let me bring this down if I may. Are you really saying that the uncircumcised male becomes larger in an excited state because he is uncircumcised?
No, that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that the foreskin, the inner lining of the foreskin, becomes the outside part of the penis, so that the tender, gentle, fragile mucous membrane of the inside layer of the foreskin and the head of the penis that it has protected, which is also soft, moist, gentle mucous membrane, is what comes in contact with the vaginal wall, also soft, moist mucous membrane of the woman.
Isn't it true, Marilyn, isn't it true that the incidence of cervical cancer is higher among women whose relationship has been with the uncircumcised male?
That came from the Windner study during the 50s. That's been